The Nile surged beyond its banks, drowning crops and swallowing clay homes as lightning carved through the skies like the wrath of gods. In the village of Per-Bastet, fear turned to fury, and the whispers grew louder. "It began the day she arrived," someone muttered. "The storms follow her," said another. Their eyes turned to Nefruri, a girl barely 16, with hair like midnight silk and eyes the color of river silt after the flood. She had appeared after the spring solstice, walking alone from the east, speaking little, and settling at the edge of the village in a hut abandoned by time. No one knew her people. No one knew her past. But they knew fear, and fear needed a name. When the storm toppled the sacred fig tree, the elders gathered beneath the temple canopy and cast their judgment. The gods are displeased. Her presence brings imbalance. Nefruri was summoned, her linen robes soaked, her body trembling not from rain but from the weight of hatred. She stood barefoot before the high priest, whose voice cracked like thunder. "Do you summon storms, girl? Have you cursed our soil?" She did not answer, but her silence spoke volumes. That was all they needed. The villagers prepared to cast her out, to send her into the desert where only jackals would listen. But as the rain hammered the earth and torches flickered, one figure stepped forward: Setka, the dancer of the moon festivals. Known for his wild spirit and laughter, Setka saw not a curse, but a rhythm in her presence. "Let the gods hear joy, not blame," he declared. And before the stunned crowd, he reached for her hand. Hesitantly, she placed her fingers in his, and in the downpour, they moved twirling, leaping, laughing. Their dance was defiance, beauty, and prayer. Rain pelted their skin, but the firelight around them grew, and the storm, somehow, softened. The villagers watched in silence, unsure whether they witnessed madness or a miracle. Nefruri's eyes met Setka's, wide with disbelief. No one had ever touched her without fear. Until now. In the clash of thunder and the hush of awe, something shifted. They blamed her for the storms, but he, the wild one, danced with her in the rain. By dawn, the rain had quieted, but the village was far from still. What Setka had done rippled through Per-Bastet like the Nile at flood. The elders gathered once more, their voices echoing off stone walls and incense-thick air. "He dances with her as if she is Hathor herself," one grumbled. "Or Isis in disguise," muttered another. But fear still clenched their hearts, for tradition weighed heavier than joy. The priestess Merit, stern and silver-haired, warned them. When the gods send a storm, they demand obedience, not celebration. Still, not all agreed. The younger acolytes, those raised under Setka's laughter and tutored in the art of movement, questioned, if she was truly cursed, why did the storm stop when they danced? Meanwhile, Nefruri sat on the worn steps of the old falcon shrine, a thin shawl wrapped around her damp shoulders. She stared at the sky blue now, too calm. Inside her, a storm still raged. She had known exile before. She had seen fear in others' eyes, but never had anyone stood between her and judgment. Setka had not just danced, he had risked everything. She didn't understand why. Setka appeared again before noon, balancing a tray of warm flatbread and honeyed dates. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, with that crooked grin that made girls blush and priests frown. She looked at him, unsure how to respond. He sat beside her without asking, hands stained with clay and joy. "They don't understand storms," he said. "But I do. They're wild, yes, but they clear the air, feed the soil. Without them, nothing grows." Nefruri said nothing. She only watched him eat, puzzled by his ease, by his lack of fear. "They'll come for me," she finally whispered. "They always do." Setka shrugged. "Then we'll dance again." The simplicity of it shook her. No questions about who she was. No demands for proof. Just presence. Just warmth. Yet not everyone saw it that way. Behind sandstone columns, Merritt watched them both. Her eyes were sharp, unreadable. She had seen omens, dreams of water swallowing the land. And in those visions, a girl with eyes like river silt always appeared. Perhaps Nefruri was not the curse, but a sign. Still, Merritt knew this. When signs appear, gods demand answers, and the next storm would bring more than rain. 3 nights later, the village awoke to a scream. A child had vanished from his sleeping mat, the reeds torn, the mat soaked with strange black water. Panic spread faster than fire. Women clutched their children. Men grabbed staffs and flint blades, and all eyes turned once more to the girl at the edge of the village. Nefruri, the cursed one, the storm walker. "She brought the dark water," someone cried. "It's the same as the flood by the shrine." They dragged her from her hut, her arms scratched by the thorns she'd planted for protection. But she didn't resist. Her face was calm, almost empty, as though she had expected this. Setka arrived moments later, breathless, clothes half torn from running. "You blame her for everything you cannot understand," he roared. "She is not the Nile. She is not your fear." But the crowd had already turned. They shoved him back, voices rising like locusts. Even Merritt, watching from a temple arch, said nothing. She saw the symbols now on Nefruri's arms, faint glowing swirls like those carved in ancient tombs, seen only by moonlight. Marks the old scrolls called Tears of Tefnut, gifts of the goddess who ruled moisture, chaos, and purification. The high priest declared a trial by water. If she sinks, the gods claim her. If she floats, she is cursed and must be banished. The irony was cruel. Nefruri, made of water, feared drowning more than judgment. They bound her wrists with reeds and led her to the flooded basin behind the temple. She said nothing. Only when they pushed her forward did she speak, her voice soft as drizzle. "You fear what flows freely, but Nile never apologizes for rising." They dropped her into the water. Silence followed, then gasps. Nefruri did not float. She did not thrash. She sank, slowly, like a stone kissed by the river. The water grew still, unnaturally still. Panic spread through the onlookers. "She's gone," someone murmured. "The gods have taken her." But Setka dove in without hesitation, vanishing beneath the surface. Moments later, he rose, gasping, dragging her body with him, unconscious but breathing. The reeds around them bloomed with white flowers, out of season. The basin, once black with mud, now shimmered clear. And somewhere in the crowd, an elder fell to his knees and whispered, "We judged a blessing as if it were a curse." They carried Nefruri into the temple, laying her gently upon woven mats near the sacred fire. Her skin was pale, lips tinged blue, but her chest rose faintly. Setka knelt beside her, drenched and trembling not from the cold, but from something deeper. Awe, fear, love perhaps, though he wouldn't name it. Merit dismissed the villagers with a sharp wave, her voice like the snap of reeds. Enough! Return to your homes. She belongs to the gods now. No one dared argue. Even the high priest, once so certain, lowered his gaze and stepped back. As the crowd dispersed, Merit lit a narrow oil lamp and knelt at Nefruri's side. She studied the glowing patterns on the girl's arms, now brighter, pulsing softly like embers beneath her skin. "These are not curses," she whispered. "These are memories." Setka furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" The priestess looked at him, her eyes no longer hard. "There are legends of water-bearers, those born under storms, touched by the breath of Tefnut. In times of imbalance, they return to cleanse the earth. She is one of them." Nefruri stirred. Her fingers twitched. Slowly, her eyes opened muddy gold, reflecting firelight and fear. She sat up, gasping. "He's still there," she said. "The child, in the water." Merit frowned. "You saw him." Nefruri nodded. "In the depths, a spirit not dead but taken." The priestess stood at once. "Prepare the offerings. This is more than we thought." That night, while the village slept uneasy, Nefruri, Setka, and Merit ventured to the river's edge. The moon cast silver paths across the water. Nefruri stepped in first, barefoot, the waves parting as if recognizing her. She closed her eyes, then pointed. There. Without hesitation, she dove once more. Minutes passed. Then a splash. He rose, cradling the child, dazed but alive. The villagers, awakened by drums, gathered silently. No one spoke. They only watched as Nefruri took the boy into her arms, kissed his forehead, and whispered a word that no one understood. From that moment, the wind changed. The Nile pulled back to its banks. Crops began to sprout where there was once rot. And the villagers? They still feared her, but now it was the reverent kind. For the storm had not taken the child. The river had hidden him, and only she had heard its call. The following day silence reigned in Per-Bastet. Not the silence of peace, but of unease. The villagers watched Nefruri from behind curtains, eyes full of questions they dared not ask. Children whispered about her glowing arms and the flowers that bloomed where she stepped. Merchants avoided the path she walked. Yet no one accused her now. How could they? She had returned the lost child. She had calmed the river. But reverence is a fragile thing, and fear is a stubborn weed. It took root again when the priesthood gathered behind closed doors. High Priest Intef stood before Merit with a scroll clenched in hand. "There are laws," he said coldly. "Divine ones. A woman touched by the gods must be secluded, watched, controlled." Merit's eyes flashed. "She is not a relic. She is a girl." Intef stepped closer. "And yet the signs are clear. The mark of Tefnut. The child returned. The rivers change. She is a vessel now. She belongs to the temple." Setka, who had waited in the corridor, burst in. "You want to cage her like a sacred bird?" That's not faith. That's fear. The elders demanded a binding ritual, a rite of obedience meant to seal Nefruri's powers and tether her to the temple's will. Setka argued. Merit warned, but the decree was made. The ritual would be held at the new moon. Until then, Nefruri was confined to the inner sanctum. No visitors, no voice. Inside the sanctum, light barely touched the walls. Nefruri sat alone, her hands pressed to the cold stone. She remembered Setka's words. Storms feed the soil. But what if the storm was being buried? That night, Setka came in secret, slipping past acolytes with dancer's ease. He brought her honeyed figs and a carved charm, an ibis, symbol of wisdom. They mean to keep you, whispered, not protect you, own you. Nefruri looked at him, something fierce stirring in her gaze. Then we don't stay, she said. But we don't run, either. We rise. Setka smiled. You sound like thunder when you speak like that. She held his gaze. Then let them hear me. And so, under the cover of night, plans began to form quiet as a breeze, sure as a coming storm. The gods had touched her, yes, but no one would write her fate but herself. As the new moon approached, preparations for the binding ritual intensified. Priests carved glyphs into obsidian bowls, blended sacred oils, and rehearsed chants drawn from scrolls so ancient their edges had crumbled to dust. The temple bell rang out daily, each tone a countdown to the moment Nefruri's will would be sealed. But inside the darkness of her chamber, another plan took shape, hidden behind Setka's careless grins and Nefruri's calm silence. Beneath the temple were catacombs twisted like serpents beneath the earth. Setka and Merit traced old escape paths, sealed tunnels, unused burial routes, forgotten by all but the hawk-eyed priestess. These were used in times of invasion, Merit explained. But now they will serve a rebellion. She no longer doubted Nefruri's purpose. The girl was more than touched by gods. She was change itself. On the eve of the ritual, Setka brought Nefruri a robe of silver linen woven from the cloth used to wrap sacred dancers. They'll try to make you kneel, he whispered. But wear this like armor. She took it, her fingers brushing his. And you? He grinned. I'll be the distraction. The temple plaza was packed at moonrise. The villagers, priests, and elders all stood in a circle, watching as Nefruri was led to the center. Drums pounded. Smoke from burning lotus filled the air. High Priest Intef raised the binding staff, chanting the invocation. By the will of the gods, we seal what we cannot tame. But the chant was interrupted. A cry, then a scream. Setka leapt into the crowd, twirling and whirling with wild abandon, knocking over urns, sending priests stumbling. The gods love dance more than chains, he shouted. Chaos spread. Merit moved swiftly to the chamber wall, tapping the old stones in a pattern only she remembered. In the confusion, Nefruri stepped back, then ran. At the wall, a hidden panel opened. She vanished into the dark. Inside the catacombs, lit only by flickering torches, she ran with the swiftness of river wind, guided by instinct and the memory of whispered prayers. Above, thunder rumbled, though the sky was clear. Dust fell from the temple columns. The ground trembled not from footsteps, but from something older, something waking. Per-Bastet had tried to bind a storm. Instead, it had buried a spark. Now, The desert was ready to burn. The tunnels beneath Per-Bastet were not merely escape routes. They were veins of forgotten magic, older than temples, older than scrolls. As Nefruri raced through them, led by Merritt's map and Setka's torch, she felt the energy humming around her like a heartbeat. Carvings lined the walls, figures of women with water swirling from their palms, serpents coiled around sundisks, and eyes that seemed to follow her. "These are the mothers of the flow," Merritt had once said, "guardians of the balance between storm and soil." After hours of winding through the underworld, Nefruri emerged into a wide cavern open to the stars, an ancient ceremonial ground long buried by sand and silence. Palm trees curved overhead, their roots drinking from a spring so clear it reflected the constellations like glass. In the center stood a cracked stone altar, half swallowed by vines and time. Nefruri stepped forward, drawn to it. As her bare feet touched the altar's base, the markings on her arms flared, glowing brighter than ever. The wind stirred not a from within her. She gasped, eyes wide, as memories not her own flooded her senses. Visions of other water-bearers, of floods summoned to end drought, of storms called to cleanse poisoned lands. She wasn't the first. She was the latest echo in a long-forgotten lineage. Setka watched in silence, his breath caught between awe and devotion. "You were never a curse," he murmured. "You were the answer." That night, they camped by the spring. Merritt arrived quietly, dust-streaked and calm. "The temple has declared you an outlaw," she said. "There is a bounty on your head. But something shifted after you vanished. The water began to rise in the village wells. The crops straightened, and people are asking questions." Nefruri stared into the spring. "Then they'll come." Merritt nodded. "Some to capture, some to follow." Nefruri turned to them both. "Then we prepare. No more hiding." She spent the night weaving water from the spring into thin strands, coating stones with symbols from the altar. As dawn broke, the ceremonial grounds shimmered with new life words of protection, patterns of power. The storm was no longer a threat. It had found its center. And for the first time, Nefruri did not feel like a girl running from fate, but a force walking toward it. The desert awoke with warning. Thunder cracked above Per-Bastet, though no clouds stirred. The villagers looked skyward in fear, for they had heard the tales of a girl who sank like stone, who danced with lightning, who vanished beneath the temple and took the storm with her. Now, they felt her return in the wind's strange hum, in the ripples forming across still water, in the restless stir of birds abandoning trees before dawn. Back at the ancient ceremonial grounds, Nefruri stood upon the altar, the markings on her arms pulsing in rhythm with the sky. Her robe fluttered like a banner, silver threads glinting. Setka and Merritt stood beside her, watching as the wind gathered. "They will come armed," Merritt warned. "Swords, torches, chains." Nefruri nodded, her eyes steady. "Let them. I will not harm them. But I will not kneel again." By mid-morning, the temple guards arrived, 12 in number. Faces veiled, staffs marked with the Eye of Ra. Behind them came High Priest Intef, robes pristine, voice cold as obsidian. "You have defied sacred law. Surrender now, and the gods may yet forgive." Nefruri did not move. Instead, she raised one hand, palm open. Rain began to fall, not heavy, but steady. Not from clouds, but from the clear sky itself. Gasps rose from the guards. Setka stepped forward. "There's no defiance. This is restoration," Intef shouted an incantation, striking his staff upon the ground. A wave of fire shot forward, but it halted inches from Nefruri, swallowed by an unseen barrier. She walked forward slowly, bare feet brushing wet sand, the air shimmering around her like mist. "I am not your enemy," she said, voice like thunder far away. "I am your mirror. You feared what you refused to understand." The earth trembled beneath them. Lightning tore through the heavens, striking not the ground, but the altar itself. Instead of shattering, it fused the stone, sealing old cracks, etching new symbols. From the impact, energy rippled outward. Trees bloomed. The spring surged. The guards fell to their knees not from pain, but reverence. Intef staggered back, his staff now split in two. Merit stepped forward. "Your rule ends here." And in that moment, all of Per-Bastet knew. Lightning had chosen, not to destroy, but to speak. And Nefruri was its voice. Smoke from incense fires still lingered in the streets of Per-Bastet when Nefruri walked through its gates, not as an exile, but as a storm returned. Her silver robe was damp with morning rain, her steps soft but unshaken. Villagers peered from behind woven curtains, unsure whether to bow or run. But she carried no vengeance. Only stillness, the kind that follows thunder when the skies have spoken. Setka walked beside her, hands free, no longer hiding in shadows. Merit followed close, her priestess robes marked now with symbols newly carved acknowledgement of a different order. At the temple steps, they stopped. The guards who once hunted them now stood in silent formation, lowered their weapons, and parted. Even fear, when exhausted, gives way to awe. Inside, the sacred hall was dim, its pillars still scorched from the storm's last voice. High Priest Intef sat slumped at the base of the altar, his once pristine robes wrinkled and damp. He looked up at Nefruri, and for the first time, his eyes held not hatred, but defeat. "You are not what I feared," he whispered. "You are what I denied." Nefruri said nothing. She approached the altar and placed her palm upon the cold stone. Instantly, warmth pulsed through the hall. The vines etched by lightning glowed faintly, and the air grew heavy not with judgment, but renewal. "This temple belongs to all who honor balance," she said finally, "not to those who hoard fear." Merit stepped forward, raising her voice. "The binding laws are broken. Let this place be rededicated to flow, not force." A murmur of agreement rose among the younger priests. Some began removing their golden collars, laying them at the altar's base. In the courtyard, children approached Nefruri timidly. One reached out and touched her hand. "Did you really talk to the rain?" She knelt, smiling gently. "No, little one, I listened to it." By nightfall, the village was changed. Wells overflowed. The cracked soil began to soften, and birds returned to the temple garden. The old statues were left standing, but beside them, a new one was carved. A girl standing in the rain, palm open, eyes forward. For the first time in memory, Per-Bastet did not fear the storm. It welcomed it, because it had learned the storm was never the enemy. The enemy was forgetting how to dance with it. Weeks passed, and the flood moon rose high above Per-Bastet, casting silver light across the Nile like a path to the gods. It was the time of offerings, when villagers once left grain and flowers at the temple in fear of destruction. But this year, they came in celebration. No dread, no blame. Just music, lanterns, and bare feet on wet stone. At the center of it all stood Nefruri, draped in robes of woven river grass and silver thread, her arms adorned with golden cuffs shaped like waves. The altar had changed, too. No longer a place of punishment, it now bore fresh water and growing vines. Children played around it. Priests prayed beside it. And Nefruri stood before it, not as a prisoner, not as a mystery, but as a leader, a symbol, a bridge between the forgotten ways and the living breath of the land. Setka danced again this time, not to distract, but to celebrate. He spun through the crowd, arms lifted, laughter echoing under the moon. Nefruri watched him, smiling. When he finally reached her, breathless and wild-eyed, she extended her hand like before. He took it without hesitation. They danced together no longer as defiance, but as devotion. The people clapped, swayed, sang. Merit stood among them, head bowed in reverence, pride swelling in her chest. "Balance," she whispered, restored. As the music softened and the last drum echoed over the river, Nefruri stepped up to the altar. She poured spring water over its surface, watching it trickle through the stone's cracks. "To the mothers of the flow," she said, "to those who came before, to those still to come." The storm that had once terrified the village had become its savior. Rain no longer meant ruin, it meant growth. And Nefruri, once called cursed, now bore a new title among her people, the voice of rain. Before dawn, as the moon dipped toward the horizon, she and Setka sat by the riverbank. He leaned close. "Do you think the storms will return?" She smiled softly. "They never left. They just waited for someone to hear them." And so, the flood moon passed. But the memory of that night of rain turned blessing. Of fear turned dance, echoed in Per-Bastet long after. For when the wind howled again, the villagers no longer trembled. They listened.